If the only question you talk about is, tell me what you're like at your best. Let me tell you what I'm like at my best. Now we both know what we're like at our best. Now we have a better chance of each of us showing up at our best.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast, where we explore the seismic shifts that are shaking up the way that we work and the way that we live. I am so fired up to introduce to you all a true, he's a legend. He really is. Michael Bungay Stanier is with us today. He's in the house, and he really is a legend, particularly in the coaching field. Why, you might ask? Years ago, I remember, I think I was going through the airport and I saw the Coaching Habit, and he sold 1.5 million copies of the Coaching Habit. And I remember picking it up thinking, this is exactly what my clients need. The leaders that I coach, in order to shift them to a more facilitative type of leadership style. So Michael was on the forefront of this seismic shift in leadership. I'm not even making this up. Welcome, Michael Bungay Stanier.
And if you were making it up, that would be totally fine, because my ego feels very well stroked right now. So most of that's true. We'll roll with it. It sounds fantastic. Michelle, thanks for having me.
I mean, Michael, over 1.5 million copies of the Coaching Habit. Seriously. And you absolutely identified something and you became the number one thought leader when it comes to coaching. And then you've written countless other books since, and you're incredibly creative and innovative. And I do feel that you're on the forefront of what's happening in leadership. So I want the audience to get to know more about you. And as you know, my seismic shift has been one all about, we've got to move towards a model of connection.
Indeed.
If we're going to really transform leadership. And so the first level of connection is connection with self. And I would love for you to share with our listeners your story. Tell us about you.
Well, let me give you whenever you tell a story, you got two choices. You can either tell the story that is me bouncing from success to success, which makes it sound like I know what I was doing and that my life has been an uninterrupted avenue of victorious triumphs. Or I could tell you the truth, which is like stumbling into the future, not really knowing what I'm doing. So I grew up in Australia, happy family, great parents, great brothers. Went to my local high school, went to my local university, finished law school, being sued by one of my law professors for defamation, but survived that because I had won a scholarship, a Rhodes Scholarship, to go to Oxford. The only thing I did usefully in Oxford was fall in love with a Canadian. So that's my wife. We're going to notch up 30 years married next year. So that's definitely a triumph.
Congratulations.
It's finally staggered out of university. I'd been there for 8 years. I had a master's degree now. No idea what I wanted to do. Found a job in the world of innovation and creativity, kind of before innovation and creativity became a cool, understood thing. So this is in the 90s. So I would go and run focus groups with people, ask them how they felt about soup, and then I'd come back and try and invent new flavors of soup. So I played a very small role in the invention of stuffed crust pizza for Pizza Hut, and I helped invent a single malt whiskey that has been called the worst single malt whiskey ever invented. When I was asking myself, look, I have all these good ideas for people and they never seem to turn into anything. I left the innovation company, joined a change management company where I didn't do a whole lot. Most change management projects fail, and most of mine failed. By now I was living in Boston. My wife and I decided to go and live in Toronto. We went to our local pub. We each wrote the name of 3 cities we'd like to live in on the back of a beer coaster after we had a beer or two. Toronto made both beer coasters, but our flight out of Toronto was on 9/11. So that created all sorts of complications. I finally got to Toronto, got a job, got fired from the job almost immediately, and out of necessity started my own business because at this stage I was mostly unemployable. And into that world, I then wrote The Coaching Habit, and that kind of cemented my success. Although the coaching habit, I self-published it because it got rejected 7 times by a publisher. So I finally, in desperation, self-published it, and that worked out pretty well for me. And then since then, as you've said, I give talks. I've written 8 or 9 books. I tend to build training and communities on the back of the books that I've written, and I swan around in Toronto.
Oh, that's amazing. That is a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing, because a lot of that I didn't know about you. For our listeners, Michael and I got to hang out over dinner in New Orleans. You were here for a big conference.
That's right.
And we were here celebrating our mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, who got I think the Lifetime Achievement Award. And again, Michael was on the forefront. Now it makes more sense that you've always been involved or had a lens of creativity and innovation and really kind of seeing things differently and kind of pushing the envelope. That makes sense because you are a trendsetter when it comes to seismic shifts. And thank you for seeing it and identifying that there has to be a different way for leaders than just to give advice. So it used to be that people would come into your office and you'd say, I've got a problem. And the boss would tell you what to do. And that book, The Coaching Habit, was all about let's shift it. And how about just go through 7 questions? And so I ended up incorporating those questions into all of the leadership classes that I teach at Loyola. I incorporated those questions into all of the coaching I was doing. And now one of the most recent books that Michael has written is How to Work with Almost Anyone. And I want to dive deep into this particular topic today, because as you know, Marshall and I are writing my second book, The Seismic Shift in You. And it focuses on how important A, connection is, and B, how important those conversations are. We have to do it differently. So I really want our listeners to learn from you of how to work with almost anyone. You know what? One of my favorite things of this book, first of all, I absolutely love the graphics. I love the design.
Thank you.
It's very easy to digest. And you were one of the first people sitting next to you at dinner this past spring. You said, Michelle, people are digesting content so much differently these days. They want shorter, they want small, big kind of text, and you do this. And one of the things I love that you said in this book, and I'm going to read it to the listeners, it says, this book is the start of a movement to improve 10 million working relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about the seismic shifts that prompted you to write this book?
Yeah. So it's both a small thing and a big thing. Part of what I'm trying to do in my life is spend it in the best possible way. And I'm now old enough that there's a bunch of things that I can do, but I don't necessarily want to do. I'm really trying to figure out, of all the things I could do, what's my best contribution to my life and the life of the planet. And I think one of the things that I'm good at is being a kind of facilitator and a teacher. And I think one of the formats I'm best at is in writing books, because, as you've said, I try and make stuff practical. I make it feel usable. I can write short books so people can actually get to the end of them. And so what that means is when I finish a book, what I then ask myself is, of all the things I could be doing right now, what's my best guess at the next best project? What's my best guess at the next something that matters? And I'll typically have 2 or 3 ideas floating around. And when I finished my previous book, I had this idea of writing a book about actually personal change. So I was like, great, because I'm like, shifting our behavior is really hard. If you're in the world of coaching, you think about it all the time, but nobody's very clear about how to do that well. And I'm like, I'm going to write this amazing book about this. Anyway, I wrote it. I sent it off to some friends to take a read of the first draft. One of them wrote back and said, this is the worst thing I've ever written. I've read 90 pages of your book and none of it makes any sense. I don't even know what the book is about. It's ludicrous. So I picked through it, and there was just enough in the rubble for me to go, look, I'm going to move it from behavior change to actually talking about how do we build the best possible relationships with the people we work with. Because I was remembering that, this is stuff that I had taught before in my consulting world and my teaching world. I remembered, and it's obvious when I say it, but I kind of remembered that actually my happiness and my success is in the work that I do is driven almost entirely by the quality of the working relationships that I have. It doesn't matter if I'm working on a really cool project. If I have a terrible working relationship with somebody, it taints everything. It doesn't matter if I'm working on something pretty boring. If I love the person I'm working with, it's still a pretty joyous experience. And Michelle, I just came to realize that that's probably true for most people. And also what's true for most people is we don't do much about it. We cross our fingers and we hope for the best. I mean, let me turn the tables on you. You're co-writing a book with Marshall. Brilliant. Hard to do. It's hard to co-write with anybody because you've got different opinions, you've got different voices, you've got different experiences, you've got different agendas. I'm curious to know what you did with Marshall before you started writing to give yourself the best chance of success, if anything.
I flew to Nashville.
Yeah.
And sat down with him for hours. We went on a walk together. We went on a drive together. And then we sat down and we laughed and we connected first before we got to work.
That's lovely. And that connection is right. And Marshall's a very lovely person to connect with. I was literally in Nashville last week and he and I went out for dinner together, had a fantastic time. And that connection, what you're doing is honestly better than most people do, that opportunity to connect and be human with each other and kind of get a sense of what's going on. What I wanted to do was accelerate that process. So at the heart of this, the tactic in the heart of this book is something called a Keystone Conversation. It's when you specifically sit down and say, let's talk in real detail about how we work together before we start doing the work. So what I would have been whispering in your ear is I would say, Marshall, when you've co-authored books before and it's been a fantastic experience, what happened? What did you do? What did they do? What did you not do? What did they not do? What was the magic that made that work so well? And Marshall, when you've co-authored books before and it's kind of sucked as an experience or it's been a bit just like, suboptimal, what happened? What did you do? What did they do? What did you say? What did they say? And then I get you to answer the same question as well. It's like when I have collaborated with people, whether that's in writing or maybe in co-leading your leadership programs, which I know you do, let me tell you when it's been a really brilliant collaboration. Let me tell you when it's been a really frustrating collaboration. And that's just an example of getting into the weeds of like, look, the book is there. I'm excited by the idea. Marshall's excited about co-writing with you. You're excited about wandering around Nashville. You're excited about cracking open a bottle of champagne because Marshall loves to crack open a bottle of champagne. There's a lot of excitement going on. But these questions dig deeper into, let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do you work? How do I work? How will we fix it when things go wrong? What do we need to do and what do we need to avoid to give us the very best chance of having a working relationship that we both love and therefore creating a product that we both love?
Oh, that's a beautiful recipe for success that I think all of the listeners can utilize before you start on a project with your people, rather than just diving into the agenda items. What do we need to do? And when's the deadline? And what's the goal? Really get to know each other. What does success look like for you? Tell me about a project that was a win and why, that was a joyful experience, and tell me about something that did not go well and why. And we don't spend enough time asking those questions. And you're right, Michael, I wish to goodness that you had recommended those questions because I would have
Where was I
them.
when you needed me most?
Where were you, Michael?
I know
What's interesting? I was in New York last week with Jacqueline Lane and Scott Osman and Michael Anderson, and I led a connection walk in Central Park. And even though we know these people very, very well, I went deep, right? What's something you're really proud of right now for 15 minutes? And then we switched partners. And then what's a big challenge in your life? And once you spend that time really going personal, really going deep, then you really know somebody. And then there's the trust. And then there's the safety. So you'll love this is on one of the 15-minute episodes I was matched with Jacqueline Lane. And she said, how's the writing process with Marshall going? I said, well, I keep scheduling these Zooms and hopes we can brainstorm and work through these chapters again. She said, well, would you like advice? as somebody who just authored a book with him. I said, I would love it. She goes, just write the book and then send him a chapter and say, please edit and insert your language.
Nice.
And she said, that's the best way to author
Right.
with Marshall. And I didn't realize that.
Exactly. Because there's the thing I want to make a differentiation on is like, one is getting to know people, and that can be fantastic. But one is designing how you work together, which is actually slightly different. Like, for instance, I am about to do a reboot of my website. And so literally this morning, I sat down with the firm that we've decided to work with. And they came and they're like, right, we're super exciting. It's the first call. We're going to have a branding conversation. We're going to talk about positioning and what you offer, what colors you like, and what designs you like, and what's a logo you like, all of that good stuff. But that's the work. And when you're at the start of a working relationship, everybody's excited about the work. I mean, or even sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's like a crisis, and you're like, we don't have time to do anything but solve the crisis. But what I did was I said, look, before we get into the details, I want to be a really good client of yours. So when you've had a really great client, what happened? What made them your favorite client? Because I'd like to be your favorite client. Tell me what they did. Tell me what they didn't do. Tell me what they said. Tell me what they didn't say. Tell me how they acted in a way you went, oh, you're awesome. And then I said, let me tell you about the vendors I loved. Let me tell you about the vendors I haven't loved. Let me tell you about the vendors who we did one project together and I'm like, yep, that's good. We never need to work together again. And let me tell you why I was disappointed or underwhelmed by that other vendor. And so in this conversation, two things are happening. One is that agency I'm talking to is slightly freaking out because they're like, oh my God, what are we doing here? But on the other hand, they're really excited because they're like, oh, I know I'm going to know what makes Michael tick. I'm going to be able to avoid winding him up and increase my opportunities of delighting him. And if that happens, he's more likely to continue to hire me. And if that happens, he's a more profitable client for us. And if that happens, we're a more profitable firm. And if that happens, all our people are enjoying the work more. And everything about that is a win for everybody. Now, do I know these people? Not really. Do I know what makes a really good client for them? I'm pretty clear on that.
I love that. And you know, what's interesting. We must have been looking at your website at the same time because my social media manager, Allie, and I were prepping for your podcast interview today. And we were on your website and I was showing it to her. I said, I love Michael's website. Look how easy it is to navigate.
It'll be completely different in 6 months' time. We're going to blow it all up and start again.
Well, hopefully it will still capture your essence and your personality and your voice, because I thought you did a really good job of, you kept it simple like you do with your book design. You kept it simple and it was you're like, let me tell the story of me.
Beautiful.
And it was conversational. So well done.
Thank you.
So I love those tips that you just shared with our listeners. And in your book, you go into these specific, you said there are 5 important questions.
Yeah.
So that you can work with almost anyone. Tell me, because these questions go into dating, and that really surprised me.
Yeah. So the goal is to build a BPR, a best possible relationship with the key people who influence your happiness and success in the work that you do. Not everybody has a big influence, so you don't need to do this every single person in your life. But when you think about your ecosystem, who are the people who you just know have a direct bearing on your happiness and your success and your impact at work? And you're trying to build not the best relationship, but the best possible relationship with them. Because, every working relationship has a certain amount of potential. Some are going to never be great. Some have the potential to be amazing. You're trying to find and optimize the potential of every working relationship. And having this keystone conversation, a conversation about how you work together, rather than getting into what we're working on, is the secret. 5 questions to ask and answer. So the first question is, what's your best? In other words, when do you shine and when do you flow? Because look, if you'd had this conversation with Marshall and you'd gone, Marshall, when you're collaborating with somebody, what's your best? He would have said, it's not having Zoom meetings. It's like, honestly, what's my best is having a brilliant collaborator who does most of the work and allows me to sprinkle in my genius when the time comes. And you'd have gone, that's really helpful to know. And you just shared what your best is. It's like, here's what lights me up. What doesn't light me up is showing up for Zoom meetings and nobody else shows up. That's a deep disappointment for me. But knowing the rules of the game, that might light me up. The second question is the steady question, which is like, what are your practices and preferences? Meaning, just what are the mechanics of how you work? Like, Marshall's name is Marshall, but who knows? Maybe he prefers people to call him Marshy. Like, my name is Michael Bungay Stanier. I definitely do not like people calling me Mike, and somebody once called me Mike Banging Spaniel. So, like, I'm trying to get ahead of the curve there and trying to kind of correct that. So that's a steady question. What are your practices and preferences? You morning person? Are you Slack person? What are your pronouns? Whatever you feel useful to share. The third and the fourth question, we kind of touched on. We did a version of them earlier on. The insight behind them is the patterns from your past repeat again in your future. So share the patterns from your past. So the good day question, what can we learn from past successful relationships? And the bad day question, what can we learn from past frustrating relationships? Like, how useful for you if you'd heard Marshall go, I've written some books with people. I've written quite a few books with people. Let me tell you about the worst one. Because, Marshall likes a good gossip. He probably wouldn't mention the name, but maybe he would. He's like, I can tell you the nightmare experience I had co-writing with somebody. And you're like, this is really helpful information. And it's like, and let me tell you the best working relationship I had when I was co-writing a book with somebody. And you're like, that's really helpful information. And then the final question is, how will we fix it when things go wrong? Because when you flew down and saw Marshall the first time, you're both full of the joy of life. You're like, I'm excited. You're excited. It's a new project. Marshall gets to add yet another book to his bookshelf. You get to collaborate with a famous author. It's a win-win-win situation. It's all good. You're all imagining rainbows and unicorns dancing around, burping up tinsel. But at some stage, there's a disappointment. Something gets dented, something gets cracked, the fabric always rips. How do you fix it when things go wrong? Now, it's tricky. I'm going to make some presumptions here, Michelle, but you're collaborating with somebody who has quite a lot of status, quite a lot of kind of, he's a world's most famous executive coach. So when he disappoints you, because he will, just as you would disappoint him, how do you bring that up? How do you have that conversation? He's Marshall Goldsmith. You're Michelle Johnson. How do you have those conversations? And it's very hard to do it in the moment. But if you've had the conversation before, he might go, look, here's how I will disappoint you. You'll set up a Zoom meeting. I won't show up, or I won't be that prepared. I'll be a bit vague. I do this all the time. This is just my modus operandi. I do this all the time with the people I work with. I'm like, look, when I'm good, I'm great. When I'm bad, I become a bottleneck. I vanish without trace. I do things at the very last minute, so everybody's panicking about whether I'll get the thing done in time. I can tell you how I will break this relationship, which means I can tell you how we navigate around it, and I can tell you how we repair it.
Gosh, that is brilliant, Michael. Seriously, what do you think is the reason why people don't ask these questions before they dive into work?
I suspect it's twofold, Michelle. The first is we're well practiced in just cracking on with the work, because the work is there and it's exciting, or it's urgent, or it's a crisis, or it's what the meeting was about, or it's what the metrics are about. So we've been practicing for most of our life that our job is to get going on the thing. Secondly, it's a slightly awkward, slightly vulnerable conversation that is fairly uncommon. So nobody goes, oh, this sounds like a really easy conversation, no problem. Lots of people go, oh man, how do I even do that? And so it requires you to have thought about your own answers to those questions and have some good answers for them. It requires you being brave enough to say to somebody, hey, can we have a conversation about how we work before we get into the work? It requires both of you being brave enough to share some stuff about what's worked and what hasn't worked for you. So there's all sorts of reasons that this can appear scarier than it actually is. And it probably is slightly awkward the first time you do it, but it quickly becomes an everyday or an every relationship way of working with people, only because it makes working with people so much easier and so much nicer.
This reminds me of when I was interviewing for the first book I wrote, The Seismic Shift in Leadership. I was interviewing a CEO of a healthcare system of 40,000 people. And I was talking to him about the importance of conducting 360s. And he said, yeah, I tell people, he goes, it just blows me away how so many people are scared to death of 360s. And I asked them, why are you scared? And they say, well, I don't want people to know my blind spots. And he said, everybody knows your blind spots. Yeah. They're already out there. Let's just have a conversation. The sooner you can address it, the better. And so I feel like that's kind of what you're saying too. Let's just have the conversation.
Right. Here's what's different. When you start working with somebody, you tend to make up a whole bunch of things about that person. Like when you started working with Marshall, you made up a whole bunch of things about what that experience would be, and he did the same about working with you. And some of that was true, and some of it was not quite true. Certainly once you start working with people, you get a sense of what their blind spots might be. And some of those blind spots are unwillingness to find out what your blind spots are or share your blind spots. But equally, there's a way that we look at other people's behavior and we interpret it to mean something to us. The classic piece of research here is like, when you screw up on something, it's because of some external factor that, got in the way, and you don't normally do that, but, the car broke down, or the kid did something in the kitchen, or the computer failed, or there's some mitigating circumstances. When somebody else screws up, it's because they are a morally defective character, because they're weak and they're lazy and they're irresponsible. And that's just a very human interaction. And so even when you've been working with somebody for a while and you're like, I think I know how they work, you don't yet know them. What you've done is you've taken a few bits of data, their observable behavior, and you've turned it into a whole story about who they are and what matters to them. And part of what this does at a deep level, Michelle, is help you see and be seen by the other person. It's an opportunity for you to say, let me tell you what's actually true about who I am and how I show up in the world and what I aspire to. And let me hear what's true for you in the same way.
Gosh, as you're talking, Michael, I just think about so many projects that I've worked on in the past that could have had a better opportunity for success if we had had these conversations. And going back to what you're saying about the story, Brene Brown talks about the story that we make up. And so just say the story that I'm making up is, because again, just knowing that we're making up stories. And then Galinsky out of Princeton, his research on your whisper is a shout. So when you don't offer much information, we make up the negative, right? And whenever you're in a powerful position as a leader, your whisper's a shout. So you just have to recognize that people, you wish that they would assume positive intent, but as humans, it's really hard to assume positive intent if you don't give us enough information. So I feel like you are advocating, please, people, give us the information so that we can have this successful working relationship. Let's just talk at a deeper, more meaningful level first, and that's going to set us up for success.
Yeah, and I would add, it's like, it's not just please give me the information so we can do this. It's like, also allow me to share what's true about me, because these are questions that need to be asked and answered. It's an equal exchange of value. It's a contract of sorts. But when two people are willing to share a little bit, and you heard the 5 questions, I love a conversation that covers all 5 of those questions, but if you just pick one of those, you'd be well ahead of the game, just in terms of, let's have a quick talk about it. If the only question you talk about is, tell me what you're like at your best, let me tell you what I'm like at my best. Now we both know what we're like at our best. Now we have a better chance of each of us showing up at our best.
Oh, gosh, I love it. What's coming to my mind, too, very vividly, Michael, is for years, I'm on sabbatical right now, so I'm not teaching, but I teach a leadership class to MBA students on Monday nights. And I mean, it would not fail. Without fail, I would be in the shower an hour before my class. And that's when my best ideas would come. My most creative, and my poor assistant in the College of Business would be like, I'm trying, because it was a 6 to 9 p.m. class. Right. And she's trying to get out the door. I'm like, no, but you don't understand. Please, my best idea. And if I had just had the conversation with her in the beginning, I think it could have led to less frustration of, and obviously she figured it out over time, but it was almost like I had shame around it. Like, I'm so sorry because this keeps happening and it shouldn't keep happening. How about just owning it? I'm at my best when I am thinking an hour and a half before class, and that's when my creative ideas come to me.
Right. I love it.
And I hate to be, to inconvenient you. I just wanted to give you kind of how I work. That would just help so many relationships.
I think so.
So let's go with the final question. So you were at the forefront again of the seismic shift in advice giving, that you were advocating, come on, leaders, when somebody comes into your office, let's not get into that habit of just talking at them and telling them what to do. How about we're more facilitators and we're leaders as coaches, and we ask questions, and then it gives your people confidence because they probably have the right answer. If you ask the questions, what about this is bothering you? What about this situation is most important to you? What do you think should be done? I remember the questions of the coaching habit, the 7 questions. And so you're at the forefront of that. So now what seismic shifts with all of the different books that you're writing now, what seismic shifts are you seeing in the workplace that you can allow listeners kind of a clue into your brain and what's happening now?
Well, you're very kind saying that I'm at the forefront of these things. It's mostly me just stumbling into the next thing I find interesting. And sometimes that's out front, sometimes less out front. But here's what's got my attention at the moment, Michelle, and I'm launching a project around this in 2025. It's around how change happens in organizations. Change is bigger and faster and more complicated and more ever present. The chance of people leading change projects successfully is going down, and it wasn't high in the first place. It's gone from bad to very, very bad. Part of my modus operandi is to try and take complex or abstract things and make them feel a bit more practical and a bit more accessible for people. And so what I'm hoping to do is get a little more nuanced and understanding what's required to make change happen in organizations, and then find the very best ideas and the best teachers to kind of bring that together and share that out in the world. So that's what's brewing at my end.
I love it. And Michael, I could just talk to you for hours. I feel so privileged to have had this time with you. I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom. And seriously, listeners, if we can all, as we go into the next project we're working on, I mean, I have my fabulous assistant, my social media manager. I need to have those conversations with her. What does success look like? When are you at your best? And so how to work with almost anyone gives you those practical advice, gives you the practical tools to have the most successful relationships you can have. Thank you so much, MBS, for coming on the Seismic Shift podcast.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, and to everyone, again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans for helping bring this content to life.